The average US household consumes about 11,000 kilowatt hours of electricity a year. The biggest share of that power, about 16%, goes to this: air conditioning. Summer months bring higher temperatures and higher electricity bills, but a Wall Street Journal analysis found you could be paying more than your neighbors to keep your house cool, and may not even know it, even if the power is generated in the same exact place and transmitted on the same exact power lines. To understand how this happens, first you need to understand how power gets to your house. Power plants generate electricity. The voltage is cranked up at a substation and sent across long-distance transmission lines. Cranked down again, then sent through distribution lines that connect to your home. In many cases, everything from the plant to the power poles are owned by a regulated utility company. They supply you with the power and bill you for how much you use. Government officials let the utilities charge enough to cover costs and make a modest profit. But high electricity prices cause regulators to re-examine this model.
The big question that drove a lot of the thinking in the 1980s around electricity and deregulation or restructuring was, did the whole system have to be a monopoly? Or could there be pieces of the electricity ecosystem, parts of how electricity is generated, moved over wires, and then supplied ultimately to customers, that could be competitive businesses and kind of broken off?
Deregulation was in vogue, from railroads to telecommunications, and the energy market was no exception. It opened up to allow for companies to compete to sell power to homes and businesses. These new entities, known as retail energy companies, would buy electricity from generators and sell it to consumers, usually over the local utilities' wires. The argument for deregulation went that giving consumers a choice between their old utilities and new rivals would create competitive pricing and lower their bills. Eventually, at least 18 states deregulated retail residential electricity to varying degrees, but in many of them, the promised savings haven't materialized. According to a Wall Street Journal analysis, between 2010 and 2019, US consumers who signed up with retail energy companies paid $19.2 billion more than they would have if they'd stuck with their incumbent utilities. Retail customers have paid the most in Texas, which deregulated its energy market the furthest. This system came under intense scrutiny after a February 2021 winter storm crippled its power grid and left many Texas residents with electric bills that soared into the thousands of dollars. Electricity deregulation has worked for business. Federal data show it led to substantial savings for commercial and industrial power customers, whose large-scale electricity use give them the incentive to shop around and seek expert guidance. The retail power industry largely languished until about a decade ago, when many states adopted a regulation called purchase of receivables that made the traditional utility companies solely responsible for unpaid bills. Experts have said that because they were no longer responsible for unpaid bills, retail power companies didn't have to worry about the risk of signing up lower-income consumers.
There are often many variations in the kind of electricity contract that you might sign with a retail provider. Just as for cell phone contracts, you might be negotiating about data and minutes and other bells and whistles that might come with a contract that might increase its attractiveness. A second really important similarity has to do with the sort of central role that getting customers plays in the business model of retail electricity providers.
Experts say retail energy salespeople often go door to door and offer perks for switching to their service, such as gift cards or free light bulbs. Many states have investigated retail providers' marketing tactics that target elderly and poor customers, as well as heavily minority neighborhoods where electricity bills account for larger shares of income. A 2018 Illinois lawsuit said an energy retailer carried out a particularly egregious marketing scheme that disproportionately impacted African American consumers on the south and west side of Chicago. And an analysis of the Connecticut retail power industry revealed that retail power customers receiving state assistance to cover electricity costs, known as hardship customers, paid premiums that were on average nearly 50% higher than other customers for retail providers. Susan Baldwin, an independent consultant for public utilities and consumer advocates, says some retail companies have questionable marketing tactics with aggressive sales pitches aimed at enrolling customers.
It shows disproportionate harm to those who can least afford to pay for an essential service. This is not a luxury item. This is electricity.
Part of the problem is that many consumers don't know who is selling them their power. In most states that allow competitive electricity markets for residential customers, Bills are provided by the incumbent utility company even if the power is delivered by a retail supplier. The identity of the retailer is disclosed somewhere on the bill, but it isn't always obvious. Here's one way to check if you're paying more for power. Look for the part of the bill that details price comparison information. There you should find the price for the so-called Standard Offer Service, or SOS, for 1 kilowatt hour of electricity. That is the average rate charged by the incumbent utility. Next, look for how much your electric supplier charged for that billing period, which is often reported alongside the name of the company. Take the rate your electric supplier charged and multiply it by the number of kilowatt hours used to get the amount paid to the retail supplier. To figure out the difference between what you paid to the supplier and what you would have paid to your utility, multiply the SOS rate by the kilowatt hours used and subtract that amount from the amount paid to the supplier. Big retail companies concede that there has been some bad behavior in the market and that the industry needs to improve its reputation. And industry backers say residential customers need better education from the industry and regulators on how the retail electricity market works and how it can benefit them. Consumers can take advantage of the deregulated marketplace by strategically shifting to suppliers with the lowest prices, but that can require reading their contracts' fine print. Consumer advocates also encourage customers to scrutinize their bill and report any potential wrongdoing. And consumers can always switch back to their incumbent utility provider.
If you look at your bill and it seems to be through the roof and it's not what you were led to believe, you were told one thing about rates being wonderfully low and they end up being terribly high, call your public utility commission and complain.
Retail power was supposed to be a light bulb moment for the energy industry, but the cost of keeping that light bulb on appeared to be higher than they could be.